My name is Mildred. I am a grateful recovered alcoholic. I live in Toronto. My home group is the Rocks Glen Traditional Group. My dry date is May the 18th, 1973. I have a sponsor, and I do sponsor others. Good morning to all of you. Hi. And now we're going for a ride. I woke up this morning and said, what am I doing here? I wonder how I could get out of this. You know, there are times I get up to the podium and I just know. I just know that I have something to say. I was just saying to my good friend Rick, I've really struggled over this. Lee and I talked about, he asked me to do a workshop on spirituality. And I said, well, we discussed it a bit back and forth, and I said, well, how about we do it on the spirituality of the steps? And then it isn't just an academic exercise. So we agreed to that. Last night, I thought, I wonder how I could get out of this. It's just a thing. Will anybody come? Will they all come? Will anybody like what I have to say? Sometimes I think people who sit in an audience forget that when you get up here, that does not mean you're fixed. It does not mean that you walk in bliss all the time and that the false self talks to you. So I had to finally say, Mildred, you know what you believe about spirituality, and that's what you have to be true to. So whether you feel like it or not, whether you feel excited and think, I really have something important to say, go there. And if they like what you have to say, that's great. And if they don't, that's also a lesson. See, I think I've come to see over the years that my purpose on the planet is not to have fun. Sorry, I just don't see it that way. When I tried to live my life in such a way that I was going to have fun, I was doing immoral things, I was doing illegal things, and I was out of harmony with everybody, and certainly out of harmony with God. And I think that if I know anything, it is that my experience is here to teach me something. And what my experience taught me is, and from observing you, and from observing some of the really wonderful people that I have met, some of the wonderful people I have met, they are happy, joyous, and free. But they're not having fun in the traditional meaning of the word. I think back to a party I was at last Christmas. And the host of that party was 5 weeks from death. And he was in immense pain. And he was the life of the party. 45 years sober, he knew what the deal was about. It was, for him, about seeking God. It was for him, about being present to you for those 45 years, a dedicated member of AA. I had a sponsee dying of cancer 11 days before she died. I'll never forget this. She was skin and bones. And I said, and because I knew how much she liked to go out, so I said, how about you and I get dressed up, and I'm going to take you to a fine restaurant. Oh, she said, that would be great. And I knew what had been going on. She'd been having chemo, she'd been having radiation, she had been ill, and was often in a lot of pain. But she believed in her God. I picked her up and practically had to carry her, and we went to this restaurant, and they made a big fuss over her because it was obvious that she was really ill. And as we were saying goodbye that afternoon, I can still see those big eyes. And she said to me, Mildred, It's okay. We've traveled this journey together well. You've taught me well. She said, every moment I've made a commitment to my God that every moment I get to live here on the planet, I am going to enjoy my life here. How do you beat that? It's not about having fun, is it? It is about being happy, joyous, and free. And, I heard about being happy, joyous, and free, and I thought, that's for me. But I also knew that isn't the way life works. And I was very angry when I heard that. And I'd hear somebody I'm living on Skid Row, and I hear somebody get up here in their $1,000 suit and tie and shirt, and they look just great, and they're saying, oh yeah, God wants me to be happy, joyous, and free, and I'm happy, joyous, and free. And I'm thinking, well, good for you. I'm not. With a belly full of resentment. I didn't understand. It says God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. It doesn't say, go do whatever you please, walk over whoever you want, lie, cheat, steal, drink alcohol, shut me out of your life, and I'm going to make you happy, joyous, and free. I wasn't happy, joyous, and free. And so what I'm going to do in this seminar, I'm going to talk a little bit about those early days. What my experience of life without God in my life was like, and how I came to this process of finding peace within. Imagine, if you will, that we took an eye and we took one cell out of that eye and we put it up here on the podium. Do you think that eye cell would feel comfortable? It's not meant to be on its own, is it? It's meant to be part of the eye. And if it's going to function and have a good time, it needs to be part of the eye. Its satisfaction, its excitement, its aliveness, its joy, its health will never happen while it is isolated here on this podium. It needs to be part of an eye, and then it can be part of what an eye can do. And I think that's the way I was. Isolated, separate, me only, separated from the whole. Many years ago, we're not going to talk Facebook to Albert. I don't know who put that on. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous the first time in 1966, and I'll get back to that. But Chuck Chamberlain was alive at the time, and I was in Prince Albert. And Chuck used to come. There were a whole group of men who had been part of, they had been delegates, and then they were trustees in New York. And they knew each other, and when there were conferences, they'd invite each other. And one who used to come a lot to Prince Albert was Chuck Chamberlain. And in those days, I went to AA for 3 weeks. That's as long as I could do it, sober. I liked it. And at the end of 3 weeks, I was done. I wanted to stay in AA, so I stayed in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I did it my way. I stayed for 5.5 years stoned. And I have to tell you, it just interferes with how you see the program. Just a teensy bit. And so, everybody knew that's what I was doing. And I knew that's what I was doing, but I didn't know how to do it any better. I couldn't stand living without the anesthetic and the relief and the release that alcohol gave me. And so I didn't want to leave you people. So I stayed here, but I did it my way. And my way, of course, doesn't work. But what I'm getting to is that CEASE, how any of you know CEASE? A couple of you, CEASE was my first sponsor. And so when Chuck Chamberlain would come, he'd always arrange for me to pick Chuck up so that I'd be with Chuck, and then we'd stop somewhere and Chuck would talk to me. And what Chuck would do would be, he would draw this diagram. And if any of you know the book, The New Pair of Glasses, in there, this diagram, or a version of it, is presented. And Chuck used to say to me, he never said, you're a loser. He never said you're doing it wrong. He never said you're not right and we know what you're doing. He just said, it seems to me that you're not too happy. He said, I've learned something over the years that has helped me to be happy, joyous, and free. Yeah, right, Chuck. So he'd draw this diagram, and he'd say, we're all one. You know who else said that? The great Einstein. I didn't know this. I thought Einstein was just a great scientist. He was a great man, and I think that probably his spiritual growth was far more impressive than his intellectual scientific growth. Because this great man could say, he said, you honor me. He said, you're looking at the wrong thing. I'm just a man. It is the power within me. It is the intelligence within me that flows out and allows me to write the things and present the things that I am able to present. And then he said this, and it's kind of, I think, the basis of my spiritual growth. But it's also in the big book. And isn't it interesting? When we see the truth and we find it in science and we find it in philosophy and we find it in psychology and we find it in religion and we find it in spirituality and we find it in Alcoholics Anonymous. This turns me on. And we find it from thousands of years ago. The great masters said the same thing as the great masters are saying today. See, this is not about therapy, and as Rick, I think it was, said yesterday, this is not self-help. This is God help. This is God awakening. And that's what Chuck was saying to me. Einstein said, we're all one. That's what he said. He said, it's an optical delusion. I don't know how many hundred people are in the room, but I'm saying to you it's an optical delusion that there are 200 or 300 or 400 here. If this is the truth, then the same life force that lives in me lives in you. And I think on that basis, we come to enlightenment, or we don't get there. If I continue to look at your outsides and I say, ugh, and I don't like your skin color, and I don't like your size, and I don't like your age, and I don't like the length of your hair, and I don't like how you behave, how am I going to get along? The great teacher, when he was here, he said, how can you say you love God whom you don't see, when you don't love your neighbor whom you do see? I'm not saying that from a religious standpoint. I'm saying that from the standpoint of the kind of thing that Einstein said. He said there's only one of us here. It's an optical delusion that we're divided. It's like those eye cells. You can split up those eye cells and give them courses in self-esteem. Good luck. And you see, immediately a whole different reality takes place. And then he went on, this is Einstein now saying, he said, and we better get it, because he said we now have the technology that if we continue to think of ourselves in terms of separateness and hatred and judgment and God knows what, we have the capacity to blow the earth apart. See? And then I think of my monk friend in London, England. He was asked to give a talk. He teaches meditation and things like that, and he was asked to give a talk on addictions. And he said, well, I don't know anything about addictions. I said, you might want to go to some meetings. He went to some meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this was what he wrote to me after a time. He said, in my opinion, Alcoholics Anonymous is the most powerful, global, transformative, spiritual program on the planet today. He was blown away in colloquial terms by the sharing that we do, the love we express for each other, our willingness to help one another. He just couldn't believe what he saw. I said, you might want to drink a little more. You can come and join us on the high road. He didn't think that was necessarily a good idea. You know, and then there's one of your fellow Americans who wrote that book, Power versus Force. And he says in there, he's studied Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a psychiatrist and a doctor and a philosopher, I guess you'd call him, but basically a scientist. And what he said was, he believes that 50% of the people in the United States and Canada have been influenced by Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, we hear the detriment that we are and the bad stuff that we bring and how many people are hurt by our drinking. Well, you know, we can turn that around. And that's what he saw. 50%, because they've heard about recovery, they've heard about whatever it is that they've heard. They've known somebody who used to be a loser like me, and I don't sit on a park bench anymore. See? So, getting back to Chuck. See, that's what I do. I wander. Getting back to Chuck. This is what he used to say to me. I'm stoned. And he's drawing this picture. And he's saying, there's only one. There's only one life. There's only one love. There's only one goodness. And it's in you. You got to be kidding. I had been taught about a God who was separate from me, up there, watching, and going to punish me for any wrong move I made, and I just had better be careful. He said, our problem, if we don't get that and live from that spiritual experience, is that we develop this isolation, this sense of separation. Next time you're confronted and you're really stirred up by somebody whose behavior you don't like what they said, you really want to punch them in the eye. Just like when Rick and I stood in the lineup on Wednesday and nothing was moving because the customs system, their computers were down, and somebody came and parked herself right in front of me. I wanted to hit her. What was going on in me was not very spiritual. I looked around at Rick, and he looked quite composed, so I thought, okay, get with it, pray. So I did, and I didn't hit her. One life. She's me. See, I don't think the golden rule is about, I'm going to be good to you, so you be good to me. I think the golden rule is, I must be good to you because I'm made out of goodness. If this is who I am made out of that stuff. I'm made out of the goodness of God. And that is, of course, the prayer of St. Francis, isn't it? Let me be the channel. I'm not going out there to get the stuff. You know, the spider, see that spider up there in the corner? He's spinning away. And he's going to make a magnificent web by the time I'm finished speaking. Where does he get the juice to make the web? He doesn't go running across the ceiling saying, I got to find another spider and beat him over the head, and I'll get the juice to make my web. It comes from within. Everything comes from within. And that's what I think is the truth about me. If I will get conscious and remember it, everything comes from within. Isn't that why step 4, in the beginning of step 4, it says, we have to get rid of the things which had been blocking us. You know what I thought that meant? I thought the good stuff was out there. And it couldn't come to me because I had all these blocks. The men were out there, very good. Sex was out there, very good. Money was out there, houses, stuff, all the things that I thought were what this life was about. And I have to tell you, right as I stand here today, I believe it's about God. It's about God only. I believe that we come from God, we go back to God, and I believe while we live here, God lives in us, and we live in God. I think it's that simple and that profound. And that's why I think Chuck said, you already are everything that you can be. To a stone person, this is not interesting. And he said, you already know everything that you can know. See, Chuck was a student of the spiritual life. And so he had studied, and he had obviously read chapter 2 of the Agnostics, in which it says, the day will come when faced by a self-imposed crisis, be that drinking alcohol, or be that trying to stop somebody from drinking alcohol, good luck. I love when you talk about that, Mary Pearl. You too, Rick. I know your stories a little more intimately than I know hers. Or whether it be some guy dumped me, or I lost my job, or I haven't got enough money. It says, faced by a self-imposed crisis, and I thought there were no such things. It was always imposed by you. You were the problems. See? That's the attitude I came here with. No knowledge at all of how this thing worked. Chuck obviously knew. He said, turn within. You already know everything that you know. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't go to others, that we shouldn't go to the wise ones, that we shouldn't go to our sponsors. But I think it's also valid, and it's part of what our program gets us to, is that we learn to go within. That's what step 11 is really all about. So, because you already know everything. Do you ever sit at a meeting and you hear somebody talking, and maybe you don't even think it consciously, but you know that information. You know that you know it. Where is it from? It's this, the God self of you talking. Well, this one causes all the trouble. This one thinks it's separate. I prefer to call it the false self rather than the ego. Because somebody will come along and quote Freud, and somebody will come along and quote what Jung said about the ego, and then Maslow and somebody else, and then they say, well, you know, we have to have an ego. No, I don't. I have to have a sense of identity. And if my sense of identity is on the outside, that's precisely the problem. If my sense of goodness and my sense of strength and my sense of courage is coming from me personal sense of Mildred, I've got a problem. I can tell you, I'm on this stage today not because of a personal sense of Mildred. I had to go deeper and say, God, you are within me, and if you want me to do this job, I must put one foot ahead of the other and get to that stage, and then you give me the courage and the wisdom or whatever is required to do this job. And now I'll go back to my notes. That's why I make notes, so that I keep myself honest. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous the first time in 1966, and I'll talk more about that because I don't want to spend the whole time telling my story. But enough to elucidate what I'm saying about spirituality. And I was happy there because my brother had gotten sober. My father said he was transformed. I wanted to be transformed. And I loved AA for 3 weeks. I was willing to park my hiney on a chair and let you fix me. I had no problem with that. And then, you know, the book says drinking alcohol isn't the problem. It's not. It's the symptom of the problem. You know, in the how it works, it says, remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. That doesn't mean the alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. It means how I deal with alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. When they started to talk about spiritual ideas, I knew I was in the wrong place. I knew that believing in God was useless because God was a useless twit. The roof isn't going to cave in, don't worry. And I knew that talking about spiritual things was a waste of time. And I completely shut down. And I spent the rest of that 5.5 years drugged. I was going to meetings. I was reading the book. I was trying to do what they said. But that isn't what this deal is about. The thing about it was I saw your results. I saw the results. I saw it in your eyes. Those of you who said you believed in God, just like I saw it in Huguette's eyes that day she said to me, the eyes were shining. Every minute that God gives me, I am going to enjoy. Too much had happened in my life. I wanted to believe, but I just couldn't. And if you're sitting out there and you're in that place, hopefully I'll say something that you can identify with. I just couldn't believe. Too much had happened, and I lived in a very dark place where it seemed that no light could then or ever penetrate. But never underestimate the power. Never underestimate the power. You know, I think we've all got our horror stories, right? I have mine. I was mean. I was ugly. I was behind my walls. I was a whiner. I was a combination of everything you didn't want to face. And yet, I can tell you there today, there is one who has all power. That one is God. And through a process that I could not have imagined, and I certainly couldn't have orchestrated, I can tell you today, I believe that life is about God only. We come from God. We go to God. And while we are here, we live in God. And God lives in us. And in proportion to my believing that, consciously getting that into my life, I live in the light. Not always. I still want to hit people sometimes, but that's also a spiritual awakening. You know, if you're new, and I can imagine what you're saying inside, you want to come and talk to me, I'll be happy to talk to you. I know what it's like to sit out there and listen to this kind of stuff and just curse, you know. If you knew me then, and you know me now, you know that something happened to me. And that is described in every page, that process, on every page of the big book and the 12 and 12. So I went looking in the book. And I'm just going to read you quickly just a few of the things I found. The frequent use of the word spiritual, the frequent emphasis on this is what you need if you are going to find a way to live. It says in the 12 and 12 at the beginning, we have here a set of principles, not spiritual principles. It says principles spiritual in their nature. It doesn't say legal or monetary or anything else. It says spiritual in their nature if practiced as a way of life, have the capacity to free the alcoholic from the compulsion to drink, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, and enable that person to live usefully whole. I'm useful today. I am not a wart on the butt of the universe anymore. In the chapter 2 of the Agnostics, it says, if you can't stop drinking and if you can't control the amount that you drink, you may be suffering from a disease which only a spiritual experience will conquer. When did your physician last tell you, hey, get a spiritual experience, you drink too much? Another place he says, these are not easy alternatives to face. To be doomed. Doomed. That's a big word. To an alcoholic death. Have you ever seen one? It's not a pretty sight. Or to live on a spiritual basis. The likes of me says, is it got anything else to offer? Another one, he said we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis for life or else. The book is never threatening. It's inviting. It's invitational. But this is kind of find it or else. What did Carl Jung have to say of Roland Hazard, who was a hopeless alcoholic that he had treated for a year and then came back again? I'm a hopeless alcoholic. And of him he said, or he said to Roland when he came back, I have never seen one of your type recover. But here and there, once in a while, I have seen people who have had vital spiritual experiences. And the old in them has been cast aside and their insides have been rearranged. Again, I'm paraphrasing. He said, I don't know how to bring that about. You know, at the time he wrote that, the great Jung was one of the great psychiatrists on the planet. I don't know how to bring it about, but he said, I suggest you go back to New York and you find a spiritually based program that you can get involved in and get active in it. And of course, the rest is, he did that, he went to the Oxford group and he met Ebby and Ebby met Bill and so on. Another place on page 25, it says, this is the great fact. Fact. Not fantasy, not fiction, not an idea. Fact. That we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences that have revolutionized our whole attitude to life, to our fellows, to God's universe. And then in the appendix, he describes what a spiritual experience might be. I think a spiritual experience is that which happens, I would say, standing there in the airport, aware of the anger that rose in me because this woman, walked in front of me and parked her suitcase in front of me. Doesn't she know who I am? Yeah, right. That was a spiritual experience because I saw the anger in me. And that's another thing Carl Jung said. He said, we would like to grow spiritually by looking at beings of light. He said, no. Helpful maybe, but we have to look at our own darkness. And in looking at our own darkness, we might be motivated to find a power bigger than ourselves. Because I remembered on Wednesday morning when I stood there and started to pray, I remembered the anger and the rage in me most of my life. And how it would just escalate and escalate. And I've often said, if I had been raised in a home with knives and guns, I'm sure I would have been the first child murderer. I wasn't raised in a home like that. In my home, you shut up. You isolated. You covered it up. But the rage, nevertheless, was like a volcano, and I experienced that again. And I have to remember, this is a daily reprieve I have. I have to make choices every day. I can't just say, well, I've done these steps. I'm sober 34 years. Isn't it great? La, 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 la. It doesn't work like that. And then, of course, we get to step 12. The more I think about this, the more I think, I used to just jump right ahead to, I'm going to carry the message. When I hadn't wakened up spiritually. I didn't have a message to carry. The message that I hope I can carry today is that there's a spiritual solution for your obsession with alcohol or drugs or whatever the case is. But there's also a spiritual solution for whatever it may be. A problem in your family, you lost your job, you haven't got enough money to pay the rent, nobody seems to see you, nobody seems to care about you. That's what I believe, the spiritual solution. We learn about it through our drinking of alcohol and letting that go and being freed from the compulsion, but then we also learn that we can use that in our lives. I think the steps are so rich. They're so rich in meaning. They're so rich in opportunities to show us how to change. Because, I've traveled many places in this search for spirituality, and there's none finer. There's no finer process than those 12 steps. And then you add to those steps the traditions. Our common welfare should come first. You'd almost think Einstein was talking. Our common welfare should come first. And God speaks through each of us. When we have business meetings, we don't rank our votes by how long you're sober. We have a perfect democracy. Everybody gets a vote. Amazing. Nobody says, well, Mildred, you're sober 34 years. I guess we'll give you 34 votes, and the newcomer gets only a half a vote. Thank God. So what about the references to waking up? See? If I'm awake, if I need to wake up, I guess the implication is I've been asleep. And as I started to, way down the road in my sobriety, started to think about this, I thought, what would it avail me if I were in a room asleep and I've got a serious disease and a great doctor comes into the room and says, I can heal that person, but I'm asleep. What good would it do me? None. I've got to wake up. And then I can respond. Or somebody came in and said, I've got an extra $1 million in this bag. Who wants it? I wouldn't be there for the taking. I'm asleep. Spiritually, I don't think it's any different. I was that I cell. sitting here feeling alone, feeling nothing good was happening to me, feeling nobody loved me, life was scary, everything was wrong, you should fix it. And the truth of the matter was, I was asleep to the only thing that mattered, the God within me. See? And so I do believe we walk in this nightmare, and it's not about our neighbors. When I walked in the nightmare, it was always about me, me, me. Now, are we the only people who thirst for God? Because I think that's basically it. In the Course in Miracles, it talks about our thirst. And in the Course in Miracles, it talks about our helplessness living in this dry and dusty world where starved and thirsty creatures come to die. I read that and the tears sprang to my eyes. Living in this dry and dusty world where starved and thirsty creatures come to die. That described many years of my life. But you know, it doesn't matter how long it takes, because God works with us. I'm sure of that. He sends people into our life, but always it's the power of God within us charting the course that is perfect and that you in your life could never decide upon, and I certainly in my life could never have decided upon. Because every decision I made, I always had to filter it through that false self picture. You're wrong. I've got to find a way to get you to do what's going to make me okay. There's a path to insanity. And I have to tell you, I've been in mental institutions, insane asylums, and psych wards 32 times. That should tell you something. What have some of the great masters said about this? Have you ever been really thirsty? Can you remember a time when you were really thirsty? How many can? Where you would have done just about anything to get a drink. Not necessarily of booze, just thirsty. I read something in the paper not too long ago where some people had been shipwrecked, and they said they drank their urine. Yeah, right. That's thirsty. Some of the stuff I drank tasted like urine. What does the Bible say? The Bible in one of the Psalms puts it this way: as the deer pants for water, so does my soul pant for you, O God. Isaiah, 5,000 years ago, said, wake up, get up, and put on your beautiful garments. That, to me, is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Wake up, get up, and put on your beautiful garments and go live. The Greeks, above the porticos of their temples, had written, man, know thyself. And I, in my wisdom, thought they were wrong. I thought they should have written, man, know thy God. But the truth of the matter is, man, if you know yourself, you will know you are not God. You will know you're God. You'll know that there's something bigger than you are. And then there was St. Augustine, the bad boy of the 3rd century. And his mother was St. Monica. And Monica prayed for him because he was really the bad boy. And when he was converted, he wrote that book, The City of God. Not easy reading, but one of the things that he wrote in there was, thou hast made us for thyself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Restless. We've heard that before, haven't we? Dr. Silkworth. We alcoholics are restless, irritable, and discontent until we can again experience the ease and comfort that come from taking a few drinks. Or, as Mary Pearl and Rick pointed out yesterday, from finding somebody they could help. And then there's that beautiful poem, The Hound of Heaven. Again, you know, it's written in very old English. It's not easy to read, but there are a couple of quotes. Francis Thompson was an alcoholic who did come to sobriety, but of course there was no A. He was born in 1859 and died in 1907. And he wrote this poem, The Hound of Heaven, in which he pictures God as the hound chasing somebody. And this is Francis Thompson saying, I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. Identify with that? Yeah. And the hound speaks to him and says, all things betray you who betray me. See, you get the money, you get the houses, you get the stuff, you get the sex, you get the men, you get the whatever. Turns you on, and one day you sit there and say, this isn't it. I thought this, and so he says, all things betray you who betray me. And then he describes this denuding process. He says, my harness, piece by piece, you have hewn from me. My defenses, my old beliefs, my old ideas, the stuff that I believed so heavily in. You have smitten me to my knees, and I am defenseless utterly. I slept and woke to find that I was stripped in sleep. Again, I think that's a perfect description of what happens. That's why I say, this journey of the soul, it's written about in so many places. And God says, or the hound says to him, all I did take from thee, I took, not to harm you, but that thou mightest seek it in my arms. All that you fancy lost, I have stored for you at home. Rise, clasp my hand and come. That's the invitation of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the invitation of a good group. That's the invitation of a good sponsor. Rise, clasp my hand and come. That's what my friend the monk saw at good meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. Rise, people were saying, take my hand, come. How many songs don't we have? I took one little quote where he says, poor wayfaring stranger, traveling through this world on his lonely way back home. And then how many songs reflect this? I want to go home. Home. For some of us, that's not an image that carries a lot of depth or a lot of comfort, because home wasn't a safe place. Home wasn't a place of comfort. Home wasn't a place where we were nurtured and where we felt, oh, this is good. And then we've got Dr. Silkworth. We're restless, irritable, and discontent. And I could say angry, manipulative, controlling, jealous, all kinds of things, until we can again experience ease and comfort. I love those words. Sometimes when I'm not feeling good, I just say them to myself, and I just kind of settle right down. Ease and comfort. Carl Jung, this is what he said. The craving he felt in alcoholics, because you see, Carl Jung at some point broke away from Freud, because Carl Jung was he came to see, as he saw what was really going on, that our souls are searching for God. And so he said he thought that the craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of our being for wholeness. That's what he said. And another time he said he felt that alcoholics in every bottle of spirits with a small s were seeking the spirit with a big S. I buy that. And we sure seek some strange stuff, don't we? You know, I have sought some strange stuff, and I bet you have too. Things like power, symbols of power, friends who would fix it, friends I could fix. I've got a little Al-Anon in me too. Money, promotions, titles, information, education, entertainment, distractions, travel, romance, sex, alcohol, drugs, food. Good list, isn't it? Got any to add, J.D.? You look like the kind who probably could. What's the results of that seeking? 1, there's never enough. 2, I always need more and better. 3, 4, pain, dissatisfaction, depression. Where do I go? I thought I had it. I own all these houses. I have all this money. I've got a big house. I've got the red convertible. I've got men. I've got this. I've got that. Not right in here. Depression, anger, fear, violence, hatred. So, what's the problem? I think St. Augustine said it, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee." We looked for the solution on the outside. And I think that's why resentment, it was for me, is the number one offender. I am never angry or resentful if I don't demand from you what only God can give me. When I start thinking, you're not giving me enough, and you should do your life different, and if you were different, I'd be different, I can be a barrel of anger, and then if I don't say anything, if I stuff it, then I get a resentment, and then we've got some not nice stuff going. See, we can never get enough of what we didn't want in the first place. It doesn't work. And our book says either God is everything or God is nothing. Jung said another thing. He said, God is what we seek. And we become sick when we seek anything else. And that's why I think, if that's true, then addiction is a misplaced attempt to find satisfaction. And if we think that because I'm not drinking, I'm okay, my addiction isn't settled. It's not until I do this. I am part of the spiritual change that allows me to say it's about God and God only, because otherwise, you've seen it, we sure see it in Toronto, where people give up one addiction and then they take on another one. And then that one doesn't work and they take on another one. See? So if we look at what the addiction is really about, I'm not saying that we shouldn't try and fix, the symbols, but they're only the symbols. And the book says it. It's only the symptom. Liquor is but a symptom. It's like the Titanic. They say icebergs, about 1/10 of them appear above the water. The 9/10 that's going to sink the Titanic is not visible. It's below the water. So, what I'm going to do, just to bring this to, because I'm sure there are some of you saying, yeah, that all sounds good. Yeah, right. Why doesn't she get with it? In my opinion, true spirituality makes a difference. Now, I went to a convent when I was 18 years old. I understand it today. I was trying to force God to make my life okay. Not how may I serve you, God. It was, you better serve me, I'm going to go to the convent. I don't want to go. I don't want those vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I don't want that monastic discipline, but I'm going to do that. And when you see the hard thing I've done for you, you're going to fix my life, right? Wrong. I came out of there sicker than I went in. And that's saying a lot. The way I look at it, true spirituality makes a difference. See, I went to the convent. I was one of those people Bill talks about. I hated everybody because I blamed everybody. I blamed my family. I blamed the school. I blamed everybody that came across my path. I didn't know better, but I still blamed you. And so I went to the convent so that I could deal with you crapheads. I'm going to get spiritual. God and I are going to we're going to get going on this thing. And then I'll be able to deal with that part. And I don't believe that today. Spirituality is about change on the inner. It's about how I see you. And if I see you as I see myself, then it becomes, how do I treat you? How do we cooperate together and all kinds of things? And then spirituality makes a difference. You know, is there a change in the way you live because you do spiritual work? You know, I don't think it's just going to change overnight, but I do think that the persistence of the illusion that I'm that separate I cell is going to go through a healing process. So, back to the book. I know what won't work. No middle-of-the-road solution. Frothy emotional appeal won't work. Human power won't work. My power won't work. Willpower won't work in the service of self. Self-knowledge won't work. Fear won't do the job. Managing well to wrest satisfaction out of this world won't work. The problem isn't outside. The problem is always a spiritual crisis in here. It's always about my relationship to God. You know, Carl Jung said something else that really explains me, because I had a lot of religious convictions. I spent years studying theology and all kinds of stuff. I taught dogma and I taught all kinds of things. This is the shocker. He said, while many had religious convictions, and these were very good, they did not spell the necessary, vital, spiritual experience. Just imagine that. You can know all this stuff, and it's not the same as this vital spiritual experience. Whoa! How do you get a vital spiritual experience? I think you have to be knocked off your horse. You have to be knocked. That's what happened to me. And I'll explain that a little bit. He says, what will work is a vital spiritual experience, an entire psychic change. He says, you know, Fred, he too, when he came in, he didn't need spiritual principles. And yet what he found after his big bender, he said spiritual principles would solve all his problems. That just seemed like goofiness to me when I heard it. What do you mean? I'm living on Skid Row. I need money. I need a man who can work. I need a house. I need a job. I needed all kinds of things. Spiritual principles are going to solve what's wrong in my life. Get lost. He also says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out in every way. See to it that your relationship with him is right, and great things will come to pass for you and countless others. I haven't encountered a thing in my life that doesn't apply to. See to it that your relationship with God is right, and great things will come to pass for you and countless others. You know what Meister Eckhart, many, many years ago, said? He said the soul grows by subtraction. Subtraction of what? All those old ideas, all those phony beliefs that have kept us so stuck in the old ways, defending, blaming, criticizing, hating, all that stuff. So, I'll tell you one story, and then I think we'll take a 10-minute break. You do know that Mary Pearl and J.D. are doing a workshop on relationship, and I will not have a fit up here if you decide to go to that. If you decide you want to come back here, that'll be fine, but I think we'll take a 15-minute break. But I just want to tell you one story, and then we'll take a break. My stuff started when I was a little girl. I don't know. Maybe we've lived many lives before and we bring stuff. I don't know. But the fact was, when I woke up to consciousness, I was crying. I was 3.5. And I was angry. And I was full of fear. And I was lying in bed with my sister, who they said was retarded. She was injured at birth. She couldn't learn as fast as other kids. And so what happened with her was they didn't know how to handle her. I'm 74, so that's 3.5 years ago. No, 70.5 years ago. I was 3.5. And they didn't know what to do. The school system didn't know what to do. They just called her dumb. They called her retarded. And so they kept her in grade 3 till she was 16. Can you imagine that? Her name was Dorothy. The kids called her Dora, and they called her Dumb Dora, and she cried. See, she at that point was not surrendered to her journey on the planet. And we all need comfort. And where did she go for comfort? She came to me. I was 3.5, and I'd cry with her. And if you'd taken a 2x4 and smacked me across the head, you wouldn't have hurt me nearly as much as that. And I became dedicated to stopping that crying. It's got to stop. And of course, I have had 8 other brothers and sisters, and they loved me. Simple. I'm going to tell them how they should treat Dora. They're going to treat Dora, not that they were mean to her, but they've got to make up, and we've got to do something to stop this crying, and then I'll be happy. You know what happened? They couldn't change the course of somebody's life. I understand now that they did love her. They did what they could for her. But that's not what I saw. I saw people. I asked them to help me, and they didn't. And I grew up with a set of beliefs that I lived with and that drove my life for almost 60 years because I didn't know what was happening. My belief system went like this. Nobody cares. They don't care. Nobody helps me. I'm all alone here. I can't fix it, and they won't. And I was scared. That's the way life looked to me. I must not be important. If they saw me as important, they'd do what I wanted. And you see, we lived in a family where, 70 years ago, we didn't have Oprah to elucidate things for us, and Dr. Phil, and Maury Povich, and God help us. Now everything is fair game. Nobody talked about that stuff in our house. And so I kept it inside. I kept it inside. And on the outside, I was a nice little girl. I smiled and smiled, as Shakespeare says. You smile and smile, and he's a villain. What was going on inside me was pretty awful. And I didn't know, how that could all be resolved. I did my best to do for her. And then at 5, I picked up a drink. I'm an alcoholic from the word go. My first drink was a good belt of my father's home brew. And I was off to the races for the next 35 years. And as you know, when you drink, you cover everything up. You shut down the voice of God. You don't change. And so it goes. And that's where I'll pick it up. It's 1:15. Could you be back if you wish to come back at 10:30? Thank you so much.
God gives us just what we need.